Let me turn to John Brennan. So you know this area so well, and as the former CIA director, you've studied Hamas, and as, of course, the Homeland Security, National Security deputy. Hamas is looking for a successor now. Would it be Mohammed Sinwar, his brother? Would it be one of the, perhaps, it's hard to say less radicalized, but one of the Hamas leaders living outside in Qatar or someplace else who would be easier to reach for negotiations?
Well, I think it's a question that Hamas leaders are grappling with right now, because Sinwar was not just the head of Gaza's military operations capabilities, he also assumed the leadership of Hamas's political bureau after Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July. So he really had full control over the organization. And so his younger brother, Mohammed, as well as Sinwar's deputy, Khalil al-Hayya, they're the ones who are, pursuing the very militant route that Yahya had led. And so it's likely that one of them is going to take the lead inside of Gaza as far as continuing to confront the Israeli troops that are there. But there is a question about whether or not there's going to be someone who will assume the mantle of leadership of the political bureau. And there are some individuals. Khalid Mashal, who was one of the founders of Hamas and was formerly head of the political bureau, he could be tapped to run that political aspect of the organization. And so I do think the killing of Sinwar is certainly a body blow, a major blow to Hamas. And I think they're going to have to struggle for a while to see whether or not they can maintain any type of coherent organizational structure that will take guidance and direction from leadership. And I think this is one of the things that the Israelis are looking very carefully at right now to figure out who is in charge, if anybody is in charge of Hamas, and how they're going to now pursue their strategy, and possibly including negotiations for the release of the hostages, if there is, as they say in their statement, a ceasefire, and they're conditioning it on the withdrawal of Israeli troops as well from Gaza.
And let me just also ask you about the hostages, because some of the families, and we will speak to the father of one of them later, are really concerned that there could be retaliation now, that the remaining Hamas terrorists could take it out on the American hostages and the others.
Yes, well, there's supposedly 100 hostages that hopefully are still alive, and they're probably distributed in different parts of Gaza in these tunnels, and they're under the control of individual Hamas unit commanders. And it's a question of whether or not any of those commanders are going to take action into their own hands and avenge the death of Sinwar. And again, this is a question of who is it who is in control of Hamas and is going to make some decisions about the fate of the hostages, and hopefully they're going to remain alive if there's going to be some effort on the part of the Israelis to try to ignite negotiations once again that could in fact lead to the release of these hostages, either in whole or in part.
And as we've been seeing pictures in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, where the families have been protests overnight and again today, David Ignatius, you write that the next steps could create a new generation of Sinwars. What are you expecting also from Netanyahu? He said the war continues. That was his public speech. The Americans are pressing him from the president on down, and the Secretary of State will be going, as the president has ordered, to try to get him to see this as an opening, as a potential to say, you've done enough in Gaza. Now focus on the hostages and try to get them out with a ceasefire of whatever duration.
So I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has to make a decision with the IDF leadership whether this is now the time to move toward an end of the war. The president of Israel, Yitzhak Herzog, said today that he sees a significant window of opportunity to move toward that ceasefire, but we don't know if Netanyahu agrees. I think there are three problems, both for the Israelis and for the United States as a mediator. First, who do you negotiate with? As Director Brennan made clear, the leadership of Hamas is uncertain. Who do you do the deal with? Before, Sinwar was the key person. He had the ability to say yes and make a deal stick. There's nobody like that left for the moment. Second, what are the terms? The Biden administration negotiators had worked out elaborate terms for a release of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli prisons in exchange for the release of the hostages. Are those terms the ones that are still on the table, or are we starting all over again? And then finally, in some ways the most important, what comes next after the ceasefire deal? You've got an utterly chaotic situation in Gaza, no clear plan for governance there, and increasing chaos in Lebanon. So you could declare a ceasefire, but who maintains order? I think all those issues really need to be addressed as we move, as President Biden says, into this moment of opportunity for peace, but key questions that, so far as I can tell, are not being addressed.
And what was your read on Netanyahu's speech, David?
So I thought his speech yesterday was understandably a note of personal and national triumph. He has come back from the absolute bottom in terms of his political popularity and Israel's national psyche and morale. After October 7, Israel was really traumatized. And I think he voiced the feeling that we, Israelis, he personally have come this vast distance to be able to announce that the person who planned so carefully, so deviously the attack on October 7 has been killed. And so now clearly we're entering into a new phase. All I want to say is that there are a lot of questions that surround just what happens next.